Usually I have my little meeting minutes that I can crib off of, but the meeting's now called to order.
So beginning the meeting, there's typically some time set aside for public comment, but I do not see any members of the public attending, nor have I heard any comments. So we can pass on to the next agenda item, which is approval of meeting minutes from June 22nd.
Does anyone have any comments or suggestions or corrections to the June 22nd meeting minutes?
I thought they looked fine. I checked them.
Yeah.
2 months ago. But at the time, I thought they were fine. So I can make a motion, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes.
Can I have a second?
Happy to second.
Okay. And everyone who, shall we just do it by a raise of hands? All who agree, all the yays?
I think you should
Yeah.
call the.
You have to call it.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're supposed
So let's have a vote. Rebecca?
Yes.
Okay. And I vote yes.
Motion
And
passes.
yep, and it passes.
Great. So if you don't have your agenda up yet, the next item that we have on the agenda is project update from PSEF. So take it away, Rebecca.
Awesome. Roberta, is it possible for you to give me the the ability to share my screen?
We are all out of practice here, but I know it's possible, so I'll figure this out.
Yeah, I just had to do the same thing at the Urban Forestry Committee meeting.
I can make you a presenter. You are now the presenter, and see how that works.
Okay, so let me see a PowerPoint.
Yes.
Screen so I can see you. Okay, awesome. So it's been a little while. I think I was supposed to share this in, I don't know, July, whenever. But essentially wanted to just give everyone, what am I gonna do? I don't think you guys can, it's not full screen for you, right?
Correct.
Okay, let me see, sorry. This is hard. Oh, nice. Show screen.
I think if you click on from the beginning, it will become.
Okay.
There, you got it.
So now you can see it full screen. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, Roberta asked me to give you all an update on the projects that CPC has funded over the last several fiscal years. And so a lot of these projects predate me, but I talked to Arn and Courtney about sort of where the projects stand or challenges or successes of the project. So I think I have a pretty good handle on what's been going on, but I'll just run through this quickly and then happy to answer any questions that you all have. So the first thing is, here. Sorry. There we go. So I think you all know who we are, but just as a reminder, PSEF is the 6 of us for now. So Luisa Oliveira is our director, and then Courtney and Arn and I work on the sort of parks, design, construction, any renovation work, maintenance. We work with DPW. And then Vanessa and Malik are our urban forestry folks. So they are concerned with all things trees. So the 6 of us work closely every single day. And yeah, parks and trees, that's what we do. having such a hard time. There we go. So the projects that I'm going to give an overview of, and this is just sort of outlining what has been funded over the last several years. So so the land acquisition fund sort of is woven throughout, as I think you all know. But Morse Kelly and Healy design, those are both complete. That was fiscal year 2017. Brown and West Somerville schools are like very much happening in process right now. Dillboy is also in progress, but moving a little bit slower. Kennedy School has been stalled. Central Hill Playground is complete. It's open. People are loving it. Healy School tot lot renovation is complete. The rest of the project is still under construction, but that part was not funded by CPA. And then looking forward, Somerville Junction Park and the Glen Park Community Garden projects are two projects that I am project managing. So excited to talk to you about those. So the Brown School design. So Arn worked with CBA Landscape Architects, put the design together. Design is complete and the drawings are out to bid. And actually, I think since July when I put this together, they have since selected a contractor. This project has been a little bit challenging because like there's a lot of politics with the school and then the like PTO and then PSEF. And so the design is complete, which is the part that community preservation funds supported. But it sounds like the installation is maybe going to happen in 2023. It's like having to thread the needle of like when students aren't in school and, you know, construction season. And so this year it was sort of like by the time the drawings went out to bid, there wasn't enough time to do the installation. So this one will likely be happening next year. And so the construction funding is ARPA money, just as a note. So West Somerville Neighborhood School, this is also Arn's project. The design is also complete, which is the part that CPA funded. Arn also worked with CBA Landscape Architects on this design. This one also, I think, was out to bid in July and has now, they've received bids, selected a contractor. And so it's sort of like the whole schoolyard. So the schoolyard, the tot lot, the parking lot, synthetic turf field, the entrances, it's like the whole space. And so again, I think that a contractor was just selected, and so construction could start anytime, and then we'll go all the way through next summer. So they're going to do the schoolyard first and then the field after that. So one thing that is worth noting about all of PSEF's projects right now is that we're still really struggling with lead times for lots of products. So anything from like benches and play equipment to, you know, even concrete has been hard to get. So like some of these lead times are crazy. Like we've heard up to, you know, a year until we can get our hands on certain products. So it is slowing things down a little bit, and we're trying to be creative about how to like fill the gaps in the meantime or order different products. So it's been disappointing, but I think the fallout from COVID is still very real, unfortunately. So Central Hill Playground is complete and open. The ribbon cutting was on March 15th. I think, Heather, you were there. It's great. Everyone's thrilled with it. There's one last piece, which is the water connection. So it's part of a bigger system associated with the high school. And so before we're able to turn on the misting station and the drinking fountain, like there's sort of a larger water project that's happening. And so it's my understanding that that will happen, you know, in the spring of 23. But otherwise, it's been very busy. The library's been thrilled. It's been like a good collaboration, and there's programming, and even like the high schoolers hang out here after school, I've noticed. So sometimes I like take my lunch break over here. So yeah, really, really excited about how this one turned out. Okay, so Healy School, this is, I hear Arn talk about this project every single day. I know he's been working really, really hard and focusing on this one a lot. The tot lot renovation is done. And so again, that's the part that CPA funded. And so yeah, it's open, there was a ribbon cutting, it looks great. Now they're working on sort of the rest of the schoolyard, and so lots of soil contamination, and so that's like a very complicated process, and it takes, you know, time, and have to check a lot of boxes when remediating contaminated soils. But like I said, Arn's out there every single day working hard, and it's looking really, really good. So hopefully they're going to wrap up by the end of this year. Okay, and then Somerville Junction Park, this one I've been working on. It's been really exciting, and everybody I think is thrilled to have, you know, what was Somerville Junction Park now, you know, double in size. So if you're not familiar with this one, it's along the Green Line extension, and currently it's sort of, you know, when you're looking at this plan, it's kind of like the left quarter of the park is existing and the rest of it is currently a surface parking lot. GLX has been using that space as staging and access to the tracks while they were doing their work, but they are now sort of done. They're moving their stuff out, and they're supposed to turn the site over to us by the end of this month. So in the meantime, we ran a community process, got a lot of really good, thoughtful feedback. It was, I was just really impressed with how, I don't know, thoughtful and passionate and like specific people were with their feedback at our meetings, and it really helped shape the design. And so our designers at this point are working on the construction documentation. The plan is to put the drawings out to bid this winter and then select a contractor and begin construction in the spring. So CPA funded the design, and then we also have park funding for some of the construction, but we're also applying again this round for additional construction funds for Junction Park. So I'm personally really excited to get going on construction this spring. We actually just before this meeting, I was at the Urban Forestry Committee talking to them about all of the different tree and shrub and herbaceous species that we intend to use here. Because it's in the GLX corridor, it's required to be planted 100% native. And so we intend to work with a pollinator scientist at Tufts to make sure that we're choosing really important and like intentional plantings to make this space for both people and for pollinators. So yeah, really, really excited about this one. And then smaller, but still very exciting is the Glen Park Community Garden. So this one is an existing community garden near the Capuano School. We're going to more than double it in size, and we are working right now with landscape architects from Wright Ostermeyer out of Watertown, and we just had a community meeting last week or 2 weeks ago. Heard a lot of really good feedback from the gardeners. They're really excited to finally have a shed, to have more space, and so we are, like I said, working through construction drawings right now, and kind of the same schedule as Junction, intend to put the drawings out to bid this winter and start construction in the spring. So yeah, really, really excited. This one feels very kind of tangible, and like I think it's going to be really, it's going to make an impact for a lot of these gardeners. So for this coming funding round, our intention is to apply for additional funding for Junction Park construction, and then also for Henry Hansen construction. So there was a design done several years ago, and so we re-engaged with the design team, had an additional community meeting, And so it sounds like both Park and the CPA funding are hopefully going to be leveraged for Henry Hansen. And then a couple other projects. So the Dilboy Fields, I know less about this one, but it sounds like it's sort of in process, but because there are so many other projects, there's only so much capacity in the department. And so this one doesn't feel like it's on the front burner in this moment. And then the Kennedy School, I forget, Roberta. I know that me and Arn were kind of going back and forth about this one, but can you remind me the status? Do you know?
Yeah, so we're all a bit dusty, but if I recall, the Kennedy School is waiting in line behind the other school projects that are in process right now. So once those projects clear, then there will be capacity to launch the Kennedy School design process.
I think that's exactly right. And then Art Farm is another one that PSUF is paying close attention to. However, right now, it's really in the sort of underground engineering phase of the project, right? So the idea is that they're going to put a big tank underground for stormwater management. And so I've been working closely with Jonathan Smith in the engineering department, and he's been keeping me updated on what they're calling the Poplar Street pump station. And so that's kind of all of the stuff that's happening, the really technical, like important water and utility work. And then once that's complete, Art Farm is kind of the like top dressing, right? And so we're engaged, we're talking, but right now it seems like Art Farm is still a little ways into the future. And then of course, you all know that we've sort of just been contributing funding to the land acquisition fund in hopes that we can continue to acquire quality open space in the city. So
actually,
yeah.
Pause on the last slide. I wanted to add a couple of things in here. So the land acquisition study fund is actually a supplemental $40,000 original commitment that is intended for feasibility studies for land acquisition projects. So that's separate from the actual land acquisition fund. So the study fund, as a reminder, is available for PSUF to use in the case that you have opportunities for land acquisitions and need to do some due diligence. That's what that study fund is for. And Art Farm was recommended by the CPC. I forget which year that was, but it was never approved by City Council. And in fact, by the time the infrastructure is completed, chances are what Art Farm is going to look like is going to be substantially different from what was presented when this project was first brought to the CPC. So I was going to recommend that the CPC ask PSUF or I forget if PSUF was the original applicant, if you're presenting it, it must have been, but to ask for that project request to be rescinded and then reapply in the future once the infrastructure is completed. And there's a more clear picture of what the open space is going to look like and how much funding it's going to require and what the funding sources are going to be that go into that.
I think that's totally reasonable and makes all the sense in the world to me. So I think I will make that suggestion to Louisa and we can do that, because I think you're right. Like, it's not only is it a little ways out, but things are bound to change if they haven't already. So I think that's a great idea. And I will remind the team that we have this $40,000 available to us to do, as you suggested, due diligence on any potential acquisition. So that's exciting. And I hope that the opportunity presents itself. So a couple last updates from PSUF. Arn wanted me to tell you that the Morse Kelly pollinator garden is complete and it looks really great. And also we are working to put together a committee of folks to advise on a Somerville Pollinator Action Plan. So there will be a press release coming soon, but it sounds like we'll be looking for a committee of people to consult on what a pollinator action plan might look like. And then sort of, it sounds like hire a consultant to help us put that action plan together. So if anyone's interested, if anyone knows anyone that's interested, has a passion for pollinators, you can let me know or keep an eye out for the press release that will be coming soon. And then the last piece of exciting news is that PSEF will be adding another team member. So I know that it sounds like they're working on putting the job description together right now. But yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of projects going on and projects sort of in the queue, and always things that need a lot of attention. You know, PSEF also works on a lot of development review. So, you know, making sure that we are holding developers accountable and keeping tabs on what they're doing and that they're producing quality open space for our residents. So we could definitely use another person to help us do all of this exciting work. So that's what I've got. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question. So thank you. That was really great, and it was really interesting to get the updates on everything. And I guess when I see stuff like things that are in the queue or just now getting going after, you know, a number of years of being waiting for their turn, it makes me wonder how much how much are their budgets still on target? Like, should we be expecting that, you know, West Somerville's gonna, well, West Somerville, was that for design or for park?
Yeah, so that was for design and that's been spent. And so the sort of CPA portion of that is complete. And now it's, you know, ARPA construction funds, I think, are how that's happening. So I think it's a good question because, you know, like, a lot has changed in the world in the last few years, and construction costs, as I'm sure we all know, are way up. And with, you know, with every delay too, there's costs associated with that. So it's a good question. I think, to me, the only projects that are sort of stalled, if you will, are the Dilboy Fields and the Kennedy School. The rest of the projects, the CPA portion is, you know, complete or, you know, in process in the case of Somerville Junction and the community garden. So I think it's still a good question though, and one that I should consult with Arn on.
And it hits back to the kind of the art farm thing, which I think Rebecca already kind of addressed, but and I don't know if this is a topic for tonight's meeting, but it does seem like if there's an award to a project and that project kind of goes dark for a number of time, that there should be some sort of daylight on the funds where they like go back into the pool and then that group has to reapply. So that's more of I think that's probably a bigger topic for us to discuss as a larger committee group. And then I'm really happy to hear you have a new team member coming on board. I've always had the sense that that everyone was doing great work, but more could be done if you had more hands. 'Cause sometimes I wonder with the land acquisition fund, how actively are we searching for properties and how facile are we to be able to move on that? And so I would put a little pitch in with this new position, that, or maybe not even that new position, but a little pitch to kind of, land is disappearing all the time, and just to kind of try to make sure that we're
Part of the conversation, yeah.
Yeah, that we're actively trying to kind of do some land acquisition as we can. So
Yeah, I think that's great feedback. Thanks, Heather.
John?
So thank you. So Rebecca, thank you so much for the presentation. It's really wonderful to hear all the wonderful things that are ongoing. Somerville needs open spaces, green areas, so that's certainly something that's important and near and dear to my heart as well. I do have a quick question, and this takes it out of the slide deck that you have. I think in the appendix, there's a slide that shows that a certain percentage, a small percentage of land is owned by private owners. So I'm not sure if you have any insights into who owns it, and kind of relating back to the Madam Chair's point about potential for acquisition. So I just don't know what the nature of that private ownership of open space comprises of. So if you could shed some light, that'd be great.
Yeah, so we call these spaces privately owned public spaces, or POPs. And so and I can't speak to the old zoning code because I was not working for the city of Somerville, but the new zoning code requires developers to contribute X percentage or X amount of space of civic space or outdoor public space with their developments. Some projects instead, like in lieu of public space, can contribute funds. There's sort of different mechanisms, but a lot of these larger developers are creating public space on their private property. And so that's a lot of the work that me and Courtney in particular are doing. Is like just today, I was on a call with the folks who are developing 299 Broadway, which is the old Star Market site. And so they will have a significant amount of open space on their property. And so it's, dedicated to public use in perpetuity, but it is owned and maintained by that property owner. So, there are a few examples. Like one that I can think of is Maxwell's Green. There's like I think a dog park and some sort of like public outdoor space off the community path. And that's, it reads as public as it should, but it is actually owned by the developer. So that's what that's reflecting. And, I think so far it's been an exciting mechanism for the new zoning code is an exciting mechanism for PSUF to advocate for additional open space and quality open space. And so we're always advocating too that it truly feels public, right? Because there are, privately owned public spaces that do not feel public for one reason or another. And so that's always something that we're really pushing for. The other thing is that a lot of these folks are required to do civic space studies. And so they have to sort of look around their property at what the other open spaces are nearby and what amenities are being provided by those spaces and where the gaps are, so that they're providing something to the community that the community actually needs. And of course, there's community meetings and they're hearing lots of feedback all the time about what the community is looking for. So they're not just creating sort of random public spaces. It's very, there's a lot of feedback and contemplation and, collaboration to make sure that the design is meaningful and appropriate for the neighborhood. So anyway, that was a really long answer to a really simple question.
No, thank you for clarifying. And as you may know, I'm on the planning board, and we see a lot of requests for civic space. A lot of the project proposals include allocation for civic space, and we've always been in favor of that. And the accessibility to the public, the true accessibility to the public is really key. So it's great that you clarified and provided additional context. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Any other questions?
Oh, I was taking notes and I missed it. You said that there were two projects kind of new on the radar. One was Hanson Playground and the other one was, what was that again?
The two that we're intending to submit for this round.
Yeah.
So additional construction funds for Junction Park, and then Henry Hansen is the other one, which Henry Hansen, I don't know if you're familiar with. It's a small park on, oh gosh, it's like Medford and I forget.
But it's the water facility, right? It's got the cool water thing in it. maybe?
No, it's actually, right now, it's just a few benches and some signage, and it's sort of like a memorial to Henry Hansen, and I should know more about the history, but it was like yeah, it's a veteran memorial. And so the
It's-
original, go ahead, Roberta.
I'm sorry, it's near Magoon Square, just for location.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you. And
thanks.
the original request for the design, I think, was put forward, Roberta, by the like Veterans Association, or and so PSUF and the Veterans Association worked together on the initial application for the design, and that's the design that we're now moving forward with, and our request will be for the construction funds.
So is it's not necessarily like a playground facility, or is it?
No,
Oh, that's-
it's a passive park.
That's nice. We can use those. That's great.
Right
Thank you.
now, it's really quite small, and it's like has a chain link fence or in a couple of like monuments in it.
Okay.
It would be easy to miss.
Yeah,
If you
especially
walk by.
the challenge, I think the challenge is that there's a significant grade change. And so the idea is that a pretty significant retaining wall will be installed, but what that will do is allow for a deeper sort of park space, right? You'll be able to access more of the property because the retaining wall will be holding most of that grade change. So, and the neighbors are really, there's just one abutter, but they're really excited about it too, because there's like a row of arborvitae that have just like taken off and have just grown so tall. And so part of the project will also be to do some work on those trees, because they don't get any sunlight in their backyard, and they have a garden, and they're like, our vegetables won't grow because there's no sun. So it's not very often that people want less shade, but in this case, they're being completely shaded out. So.
We'll have the chance to learn a lot more about the new projects. In fact, in your meeting packet is the intent forms that were received this funding round. We'll actually talk about them in our meeting in 2 weeks. So more to come on the projects that are in the pipeline.
Thanks, Rebecca. That was great. Very
Thank you. Thanks
comprehensive.
for all your good questions.
It's really helpful to kind of get the context, the big picture of what stuff is doing before this funding round.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I am going to go off camera because, like I said, I was just at UFC, and so I'm going to eat my dinner, but I'm still here and I'm listening. So just so you know.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda, we'll likely move through the rest of the agenda fairly quickly. I'm also pretty dusty about all of the updates that and revised documents that were prepared over the summer. You've had the opportunity to read those documents over the last few months and send me comments, but I just want to quickly go over what changes there were and kind of what are the next steps to do with these documents. So the first is a project update. I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong line on the agenda. The first is to review the revised committee appointment procedure. So next month, it will be time for the CPC to approve the appointment procedure and then select someone to serve on the appointment selection committee. But meanwhile, I'm going to pull up that document, which I thought I had open, but I haven't yet. Bear with me for 1 minute. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to have to make myself the presenter now, I think. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So the final draft, we could call it the final plan for general public member recruitment, includes, so when we had previously discussed this, we were weighing different compositions for a member recruitment team. And what we've settled on is myself, the CPA manager, a member of the CPC, who will be selected at the September meeting. That will be the meeting in 2 weeks, although it's September right now. This is our makeup meeting. An open space rep, and so an open space rep. So PSUF may select a member of PSUF staff, CONCOM member, or a past CPC member to serve as the rep for open space. And likewise, a historic preservation rep, who could be planning, preservation and zoning staff, a member of the Historic Preservation Committee, or a past CPC member with historic preservation expertise. And then a housing rep, who likewise could be a member of the Housing Division staff, Affordable Housing Trust member, or a past CPC member. So that makes a total of 5 people on the selection committee, with representatives from each of these areas, and it can be flexible to select a representative who has the expertise. And then the rest of the process has not particularly changed since we last looked at it. So as I mentioned, at the next meeting, you're going to select, so as of the last week of September, we'll select the members of the review committee and then post the position opening in early October, and have put out several ways of advertising the position. And then the target date for closing the position will be the end of October. So essentially the month of October, it will be posted. And then a list of applicants would be sent to the review committee, and in the month of November, the review committee will be selecting the applicants. And as required in Somerville CPA ordinance, the applicant summaries are going to be posted on the city website, a minimum of 2-week period, but we can go ahead and post it for the entire review period. And so the target for selecting, so the review committee will select finalists to interview, and then interview them in mid to late November, share the finalists with the mayor in December, and then the finalist, the selected person would have to go through the city council review process, with a target for submitting that person to city council on December 15th. So this is the last chance if we wanted to tweak anything. So as of next month, we'll post this process, this procedure. So I'll stop sharing my screen for a moment. That was the selection process.
I think it looks good. At one point, the mayor was taking a look at it, or something like
Yes,
that.
I'm going to be meeting with the mayor next week, actually. So I don't know if she'll have any comments about it. So if she does, then we may look at some slight change to the process that's outlined next week.
Okay.
And
I think it looks good. Do you know how many people's term are up?
So I anticipate that Tatiana is not going to be renewing her term. She's the one public member whose term is up. I'm trying to recall now, who are the public members? The 2 of you. And
That might be close. I'm not sure.
There are 4 public members, the 2 of you and Tatiana, and Rose, yeah.
Mhm.
Rose is the other public member. So Tatiana is the one public member who we expect to be replacing this year. And we do have 2 vacancies right now, but they're for the Housing Authority rep and the Historic Preservation Commission rep. So those members have to be appointed by those committees. So if you know, and I know, I'm not sure, I think that the Housing Authority may have some candidates that are being advanced to City Council, if I understand correctly, but the Historic Preservation Commission is very much looking for new members. So if you know anyone who would like to serve on the CPC, suggest that they reach out to join the Historic Preservation Commission and have the potential to come to the CPC via the Historic Preservation Commission.
And we can continue operating with those vacancies for as long as we need to.
That's what we need to do.
Okay.
Then the next item on the agenda is to review the draft procedures document. So the draft procedures document is really just an attempt to articulate in writing all of the procedures that the committee has been following so that we can attempt to do the same thing twice in the same way going forward. So I'm going to pull this one down onto my screen and share my screen. So are you able to see the procedures document now?
Yeah.
Okay. So just a quick overview of the procedures document. The first page that has the calendar kind of says it all on one page. We have different phases of our year. The spring from January to May is the period in which we undertake our annual review, updating the community preservation plan and looking into each of the program areas and evaluating the feedback that we receive from public input so that we can take a fresh look at the needs and priorities every year and take a fresh look at our application process as well. And as we saw just earlier with Rebecca's presentation, there are some actions to potentially follow up on after the annual review process. So when we receive updates from housing or from PSUF or from other grantees, we may decide that there's a need to consider some changes to the program guidelines or to the timeline or something else. So over the summer, June and July would be a good time to schedule that kind of follow-up action. Then the application period, I'm proposing this past year, the application process was launched at the same time that we presented the community preservation plan. And I'm suggesting that in the future, we might review the application process early in the annual review period and then open the application materials, make them available earlier in the winter so that it overlaps with the review period. And that gives more time for applicants to learn about the available funds and to get instruction and input on how to go about applying for the CPA funds. So then the application period, the applications would be due as they are now the eligibility determination forms in July, and then the full applications September. And then we go through this iterative process of reviewing the applications until the CPC can vote on the project recommendations in December and submit them for City Council approval in the new year. It's not ideal that we submit for City Council approval in the new year, but I discovered this past year that there's really a tight timeline here, because the City Council, if we make our deliberation in November, the City Council will not actually take up the appropriations until January anyway. So it's best, I feel, if we slide our process to align with when the City Council will undertake their process. And then in the background, we're also reviewing or creating the budget. So in conjunction with preparing the annual community preservation plan update, the CPC decides on the annual budget buckets that you're going to request the City Council appropriate, and submit that to City Council in May to be approved in June. And then there are some corrections that need to be made to the budget in the fall before you recommend your projects, so that you know precisely how much funding is available for the to award to projects at the end of the funding round. And then I have a cell shaded that shouldn't be shaded. Then there are so there's a couple of annual reporting statements that are required by the state. That's the CP1, CP2, and CP3. The CP1 and CP3, those are an accounting of how much money the CPC has received through the property tax surcharge. And CP3 is the list of projects that were recommended in the last year. Then the CP2 is due a month later in October. That details how much money has been spent by the CPC over the year. And then finally, organization is where we are right now. We undertake a recruitment process for the open general public seats in the fall. And then at the last meeting of the year in December, an organizational meeting to elect officers. So I'm not going to go through all of the pages of this document. The rest of the document just provides details of how the funds flow and the organizational processes for the CPC. But I just wanted to go back up and look at the highlighted changes and questions. One of the questions I had, and this isn't something that we need to answer right now, this is actually maybe something that's appropriate to answer in January when we begin the annual review process, but perhaps we want to rebrand the community preservation plan update to an annual CPA report. The idea is that you've undertaken a considerable public process to develop the whole plan, and you don't want to undermine the whole plan by tweaking it every year. You'd like to be able to just go back and refer to the plan that has already been invested in. But then there's some information that does update every year, so maybe it would be appropriate to call that an annual report. But that's something that I think maybe could use some more discussion at a later time. And likewise, the annual public hearing is something that we'll want to talk about in January, maybe changing the format for the annual public hearing. And regarding the application cycle, I wanted to ask your opinion of whether it makes sense to release the application materials as soon as, like early in the spring, before the plan update is released? Or is it preferable to wait until the plan is approved in May, since it contains information that relates to the projected funding availability? So we'd be releasing the application materials before we actually know how much funding will be available. So that's something to consider. And that's, again, a question that we can answer in January. The question that I think is pertinent to look at right now, because we'll be starting next month to begin the deliberation process for this funding round. Do the steps in the deliberation process actually make sense to you? Is it clear what we'll be doing in this iterative process over the next 3 months, 4 months? So right now, what it states is that we'll be looking, the eligibility determination forms will be, they're available for your review right now. You may be able to take a look at them and have some discussion about them at the meeting at your September meeting. I'm just gonna actually pull up and bring down the our other calendar document that shows the agendas for each month. So we'll be reviewing the EDFs in September. And then the full applications are due the beginning of October, which means that at your October meeting, you would be making a preliminary review of the applications that will give the CPC the opportunity to raise any questions or identify any missing information that you want the applicants to fill in. I would give the applicants 1 week to fill in the missing information so that their absolute final applications, no more changes, would be accepted after a week after our October meetings, so November 4. And then the applicant presentations would be at our November meeting. I think that this is different from what is shown in this calendar, so I may have an out-of-date version of the calendar in your meeting packet. And then the next step is submitting the next step. So the applicant presentations in November, deliberation on the applications in December, and then voting on project recommendations in December. This is a different process than what is in the version that I'm showing you. And then submitting the recommendations to City Council after that. So I'm gonna stop fumbling over that and ask if the process in general makes sense to you.
So I guess I wonder if we could shorten it by a session. In some ways, it seems to be very sort of carefully teased out. And I'm wondering if the review of the EDF, I guess the difference between that and the preliminary application review is that the applications are then, when we review the EDFs, there's not like the applicants aren't there. It's really just sort of a informational priming of the well of this is what's coming.
Yeah, EDFs don't have the complete information. It is, like you said, just this is what's coming.
Yeah. So it's more of a sort of a heads up. It's not a big agenda item for that meeting.
No.
Right?
No, and that's the September meeting. In October, we'll have the full applications for that meeting. So what I realize now is that in the colored the multicolored version of the calendar. I have the review of the applications actually in the preliminary review in September, and then the presentations in October, but we haven't actually received the full applications yet until the October meeting. So if we went ahead with the presentations in October, that would mean that you would be seeing the applications for the first time. I could send them to the committee members as soon as they're received after October 5th. So you'd have time to review them. But you would be seeing them for the first time when they're presented in October. And then you would have November to deliberate and December to vote.
Mm-hmm.
So that is that's a constrained timeline. The extra step, so the question is whether you would want, if you're going to make a decision in December, working backwards from that, do you want to have 2 meetings for the deliberation and vote after the presentations? Or do you want to have a meeting for a preliminary review and then the presentation and then deliberate and vote in one meeting? And that's the plan. It doesn't always work that you are ready to make a vote on schedule when you say you are. I know in Medford, we frequently end up having to break up the votes over 2 months because some of the applications require filling in additional information. And it's our policy in Medford to be very flexible about last minute additions to the application, but that's actually another policy question for you to consider, is whether some communities, when the application is received, that's it, that's final, no amendments, that's what you vote on. And we're kind of the opposite in Medford. We keep tinkering at it until we're confident that the project is good and ready to go, and then we vote on the project. And in Somerville, you make a practice of the budget that's requested is the budget that you vote on. And in Medford, we will add funding to the budget at the last minute before we vote on it. But it's a matter of precedent. And I think in Somerville, you've established a very long precedent that you don't change the budget once the application is final. So like these are considerations of how to handle the deliberation process.
I think I remember once the city council told us that we couldn't, like we wanted to put more money in the land acquisition fund, and we were told that we could not award more money than they asked for.
Right, that's a Somerville level policy that was directed by the city solicitor.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that may be because the precedent was set and established by the city solicitor, that may be one that you hold firm to, although you did have the situation before where you had to evaluate a potential change to a budget, but what you were evaluating was potentially reducing the budget, and then ended up not reducing the budget in the end. But I think that you were advised that you should not increase the budget from what was requested. So in that case, I think it might be important to declare a date when the application is final. So it's useful, and it could be an administrative level task to review and identify whether any information is missing, so that I can set an administrative deadline that the applications are due the 5th. I'll review it, but any information has to be submitted and final by 1 week before the presentations. That might be a way to be consistent with what we've done in the past, but to allow you to have this process in the timeline that you have. anticipated.
Yeah, it seems to me that we've used some of the preliminary steps to kind of go back and ask people if they had a big ask, you know, whether or not it could be phased, and so that they could present their request in 2 parts or something like that, so that we could, you know, approve it. But that happens more often in historic preservation projects where it's sort of like, you know, they've got a big ask, but maybe we can give them, and we've got a lot of people asking for those funds, and maybe we can give them a part of it, but not all of it. You know, so it seems like we've used the early phases to try and guide people in terms of packaging it in a way where we have some flexibility or ability to grant, you know. grant the funds.
If we have the presentations in October, say that the request is fixed and final as of a week before the October presentations, then you will be having the chance to talk with each of the applicants in October at the presentation, so immediately. And that way, I think it would be unfair at that point to ask them to provide supplemental information. However, if you want to consider reducing the budget, you could ask them to provide information, additional information that would help you to consider phasing their project, breaking their project into multiple phases.
And we'd be asking for that so that we have that at the time that we're voting in the following meeting. So you could ask them for that at the presentation, and then they supply it before the vote.
Yes.
And we had talked at one point about that you vet the EDFs for applicability, and that if there's something that you sort of feel like it's not really quite a CPA project, that it would just be flagged. Like we would still sort of know that it came, like there's almost like a summary page or something. Is that?
So I don't recall whether I included this in the meeting packet, but I can. There were some projects this funding round. I don't recall that there might have, I think there was one project that just didn't meet the basic historic preservation eligibility. But there were a couple of projects that straddled CPA eligibility in their proposed scopes. So I drafted very detailed eligibility determination response letters that spelled out which parts of their scopes are eligible and established kind of what are not eligible, and then a gray area where up to 10% of the project could be in that gray area. So things, for example, a great example is in the past, Broadway House was advised that they could not use any of the CPA funds for painting. But they are restoring the entire exterior of the building, and you don't restore a building without painting it. That's part of the restoration process. So I took another look at it, and I guess the information that you're missing is that they'll be coming to our next meeting, or I anticipate that they'll be coming to our next meeting with a request for additional funding because their budget has increased. So I took a new fresh look at the eligibility for that project, and advised them that up to 10% of the project budget could be spent on the gray area kind of scope tasks, of which painting would be considered. So then they have funding from other sources. They will supplement the budget for painting with funding from other sources, but it will help their bottom line to be able to contribute some CPA funds toward what is legitimately required to complete their project. And there's similar issues with park and open space projects. For example, sidewalks are not an eligible CPA activity, and interpretive signage is not an eligible CPA activity, but it's difficult to complete a park project without addressing the intersection between the park entrance and the sidewalk, or without providing signage within the park. So by spelling out what the maximum percentage is of these tasks that wouldn't be allowed as standalone projects, but could be part of a larger project, we'll experiment with 10% and see whether, because this is with input from the city solicitor, we're trying to set some clear criteria without really having a lot of background information or experience on which to base that estimated 10%. So I can include those eligibility determination letters in the meeting packet for the next time if I didn't already, just so that you have them available to refer to them, and not that we need to go over them in the meeting. I just want to return to, are there any other questions or suggestions about the review process? I think this has actually been really helpful to highlight and identify or hone in on what our review process is going to look like. I'm going to share my screen again, and we should be looking at the grant administration questions. Another important question that I think is actually relevant now is whether, so the Affordable Housing Trust, due to at the discretion of the CPC early on in the Community Preservation Act program, the CPC made a condition that Affordable Housing Trust must submit an annual report twice a year. And I last year created a new template for the Affordable Housing Trust's annual reporting, so that it breaks up the reporting into two different sets of information that they give us once a year for each set of information. And I wonder whether it would make sense to consolidate that into a single annual report that might be delivered in the spring in conjunction with our annual review process. We could initiate that next year so that we'll be receiving the October annual report this year, and then another spring annual report next year. And then if we decide to implement this change, then we would skip to a single annual report in 2024. Because that was a vote of the committee way back when, I think that I'd request a committee vote to change that process, but that doesn't necessarily need to be tonight. If you feel that's worth considering, we can put that on the agenda for our annual review period. And then I wanted to highlight grantee reporting. Previously, in the before times, meaning before COVID, before all of the staffing changes, we used to require updates from the grantees at least annually, or with their invoices or disbursement requests. So I wondered if it's helpful for the committee to have periodic written or verbal reports from all of the grantees, like we've just had from PSEF. The most recent set of annual reports received in March 2020 is provided in the meeting packet. If we wanted to do something like, to continue having something like that, I might change the format. But that was a request for all of the applicants to provide annual reports, and then that was compiled into a document for the CPC benefit. And then I also received similar information from non-city grantees via their invoice reporting forms. So I included in your meeting packet an example of that, the Community Growing Center's report, because their project was just completed and closed out within the last season. So again, how helpful, what is the most helpful way that I can pass on this information to you all? Is perhaps simply putting it in the meeting packet for your information that you can review on your own. We could ask the grantees to come and give a presentation, perhaps like during our annual review process, perhaps we could break up the annual hearing and have a meeting that has all of the project updates in one meeting, and then kind of a looking forward discussion in a second meeting. And maybe the public participation could be, the public hearing could be that second meeting, the looking forward version, something like that. So I'm throwing out a lot of questions to you and then not giving you a chance to answer them. So stop me and we can go back to any of these.
Does anyone want to respond to Roberta?
Thinking about this, the question of reports from the grantees, I fear that if you just like threw it in a meeting packet, it might get overlooked, you know, because it's something that we wouldn't need to vote on. And actually, it was really nice just now to get Rebecca's report and hear the fruits of our labor, basically. You know, we make these decisions, give up the money, and then that's actually kind of satisfying to have a report back and then hear, oh, this is what's happening with that money. Yeah, so I kind of fear that if it just gets thrown in a meeting packet, it's not something we vote on, it would just we wouldn't necessarily take the time. People, I'm just speaking honestly here, because unless it was on the agenda of something we were going to review together, or somebody came in. And I don't know if I want to require that and put work on people's plates necessarily. But I guess I definitely would shy away from just putting it in a meeting packet and not addressing it, because then I think we miss it. We would miss it. We the community members are missing out at that point to some degree, because it is nice to hear what happens.
Okay.
Those are my first thoughts.
Yeah, thank you.
So I guess what I'm thinking about is I agree with you, Laura. I think that if it was just in the packet, it might get kind of overlooked. And I don't know if it's necessary for everyone to come in and report, although it is nice to have the good news. But I'm thinking also about the stuff that sort of that isn't making progress. Like, how do we know? How can we have kind of a sense? Like, I know that in our annual update, we get a really good sense about where everything kind of is, but is the annual update enough, you know, or do we want something that's 6 months away, you know, apart from that, where we can, I mean, some of the grantees are better than others at following through and accessing and using the funds, or they get stuck on something, or quite frankly, the city may not even award it to them for 6 months. And in that case, it's something where, not that we have the power to move things along any faster, but it is interesting to know, like, so has everyone like gotten their money? have access to it yet. It's sort of surprising sometimes that it can take that long. So I think that's the purpose. Like that's kind of what we're trying to achieve in that, is that maybe once a year is not quite enough. And so just for kind of an awareness of how well is the machine running and how well are the grantees doing at accessing it and moving forward. That's, so how does that take them all trotting in and coming in and presenting, or does that take administrative work to sort of, present an update, or with a couple of people invited? I think that format could be discussed, but.
Yeah, because we want to be mindful of people's time, in terms of, I would hesitate to require people to come in. Something in the middle would be to require that they write something at a certain point in the year, and then if that falls on Roberta's shoulders, then to collect it and then add it to an agenda, just to review it, as opposed to, oh, it's in your meeting packet. Just give a quick update or something. It's just a lot, 5 minutes to go over it.
Yeah,
That's what I would propose.
I think what I outlined in that calendar as we're drilling down on this was that in February, we could have project status updates, and maybe that's where we invite the grantees to come in and just give us a 5-minute update on where their projects are, what they've accomplished, so that we can ask them questions. And then in September, to have a summary status update where I collect the information and then deliver it to you in writing, and maybe not give you the long form version, but just a summary table like what we included in the annual report this year. That just kind of shows you what's moving, what's stalled, what's completed, etc. And that could potentially take the place of so we also in the past have had semi-annual reporting, where we had the community preservation plan in the spring and then an annual report in the fall. And I'm not entirely clear on what the content of each of those was meant to be separate from the other. So the most useful content that I can think of would be that summary progress report for all of the projects as a mid-year update. And if there's anything else that you'd want to have updates on, I'd be happy to include those as well. So I think that is all of the questions.
What is the typical length that it takes before grantees can access their funds?
Longer than you think. I think at this point, so we have 3 non-city grantees this past year. And I think that at this point, all 3 of them have their grant agreements signed. One of them needs a contract amendment already on that original grant agreement, and that stalled. The reasons for the stalling are both on the grantees end, because the process of signing contracts in Somerville is very long and detailed, and it's complicated and difficult for the grantees to understand. So I do the best I can of walking them through it, and I think it's gotten a little bit more tenable for the grantees. And they also, all of these grantees have been through it before, so they're becoming more familiar with the process as well. New grantees, it can be difficult. But also on the city side, there's 12 different forms and attachments that get assembled to make one of our grant agreements. And then that has to be essentially circulated between 5 city departments. And the process for doing that is inefficient. So I have a goal to try to make that process more efficient, but it's going to require cooperation. You know, it's beyond OSPCD's hands. It's going to require cooperation among different departments to obtain software, for example, that could help us to manage the process more efficiently. So that's why it takes so long. It can take, I'd say, typically 6 to 8 months for the grant agreements to get signed. Typically. And that's not only our grant agreements, that's, you know, other city programs as well.
Mhm. So I get the sense that there's nothing that we as the committee can do to simplify that's going to be more about you working through a process and talking to various people to come up with something that might be more efficient.
Well, we have control over is everything before the projects go to city council for approval. And so over the past year, we've taken a lot of steps to simplify the application process so that that's more efficient and hopefully easier for the applicants. We could still probably do a better job of simplifying the application process and making it more rational. But there is a lot of information that we need in order to be able to do our due diligence to utilize the funds correctly. And so there's only so much that we can simplify the process. So in one case, we had an applicant who needed extra assistance to be able to submit an application that was deemed to be a high priority. So that's why we used administrative funds to actually hire somebody to help them with the application process. So that's an unusual situation that I think we can't do that for all of the applicants, but where it meets, where it's been identified as a high priority, and we see kind of that it's a barrier that there we don't see any other way to overcome. That we took that approach in that case. The other thing that we have control over, perhaps, is in order to disperse the funds, we need to receive certain information from the grantees showing how they've spent the funds that they've received already and that they've already carried out the segment of the scope that those funds were meant to cover. So we can make that reporting requirement to be as manageable as possible so that they can receive their funds. And that, again, is not the easiest thing for all of our applicants. Often the applicants who have the greatest need for the funding don't necessarily have the greatest capability for managing the funds administratively. So that's something that we can work on. I haven't really begun to work on that yet, but it's on my short list of things because I've got some applicants or some grantees right now who are struggling with it. Any other procedural questions? I'm going to skip over the next item on the agenda, which is the intent forms received, because that's something that you can go over at the next meeting in a couple of weeks. So then that leaves other business. And my notes for other business. The one thing that I wanted to highlight, I have to open my files again. Oh, I'm gonna have to put that screen to show it. So you should see these, the schedule for tabling events. So we have covered all of the farmers markets that we can attend. Thank you to Heather and Rebecca for handling those. The Strike Up the Bands event just happened last Sunday, and I was there for that. So I'll be processing the data for that this week. Then the next event that we have is Tufts Community Day on October 2nd. We're going to be sharing a table with Medford's Community Preservation Committee. And I have several volunteers lined up from Medford for their side of the table, but I don't have the Somerville side of the table completely covered. I'm only able to attend for 2 hours in the middle of the event. So if anyone is available on October 2nd, that would be extremely helpful. I do have a city staff person who can step in for maybe either the beginning or the end of the time if we have someone who can do the other segment.
I'm sorry, I have another commitment that day already.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I'm going to be out of town that weekend as well.
Okay. Then we'll try to make do with covering this with staff. I can check in with Rose and David. I don't think either of them have weighed in yet on their availability. And then the Monster Mashup, thank you, Jahan, for volunteering to step up for that. It is a long event, so if anyone else is available, we could be able to give Jahan or I a spell to take a rest for a bit and get to see the kids parading around in their Monster Mashed Up costumes. So.
Roberta, I'm gonna be available for the entire period of time, so it's really not a problem on my end.
Great, thank you, Jahan. All right, so that's the upcoming outreach meetings. I wanted to also just make a note of items that I included in the meeting packet. Like I mentioned earlier, we received a final invoice to close out the Somerville Community Growing Center project. And that report that they submitted is really interesting. So I encourage you to take a look at it. And I believe that the Somerville Community Growing Center is having a gala event in the upcoming weeks. It was supposed to be this Sunday, and I just received notice that it's rescheduled, and I don't know that they have a date to reschedule it yet. So keep an eye out for that. That might be a really nice thing to go and celebrate the work that we did and see their facility all completed. And the other thing I wanted to mention was at our next meeting, we'll be receiving a preventative maintenance report from Capital Projects regarding Prospect Tower. As it was a condition of the grant when it was awarded in 2015, that a report be given every 5 years. So it's due, and I asked for it, and so we'll be having Capital Projects come to tell us about preventative maintenance. And then I have a couple of other notes. Oh, one thing that I do need a quick committee vote on. I do have in the meeting packet the administrative budget because it says in the procedures document that I studied over the summer that that it gets presented to the CPC every year. So I want to have a chance to talk about that with you, but I won't do that tonight. Then the thing that I do want to bring up is the community, the Community Preservation Coalition, the statewide coalition dues are higher than what we anticipated this year. I'm going to open that file so that I can explain.
I think that's sort of interesting about the maintenance report. While you look for that, I'm just going to make the comment because it's always so tricky in preservation, that line between deferred maintenance and preservation and stuff. So it's, and in the case of a city-owned resource that, you know, needed a lot of work, you know, to kind of hold them to the maintenance end of it after they've made the investment, is just sort of an interesting mechanism that somebody put into play.
Okay, so I have the information available. Have I shared the screen? Yeah, I'm sharing it now. And then I need to find the document. There. So included in your meeting packet is this communication that I had with the Community Preservation Coalition. They submitted to us an invoice for $7,900 for their annual dues this year, which is higher than anticipated. Last year, the dues were $4,981. And there happens to be a requirement in our procedures that the CPC needs to vote on any administrative expenditures that exceed $5,000. So before I can pay this invoice to the coalition, I need to have your approval of the $7,900 invoice.
And they responded to you with an answer for why it had changed.
Yes. So
Which-
Somerville has actually fluctuated back and forth between the two levels of dues. And that's because Somerville's revenue stream has fluctuated. In the beginning, it was higher, and then it dipped for a few years, and now it's higher again. And so we've just been straddling a threshold all of this time over which the dues, a higher level of dues, are assessed to the city. And the communication from Stuart essentially stated that as we've been straddling the threshold, we've been at the very upper end of the lower threshold for some of these years. And now we've tipped over to the lower end of the upper threshold. But if you were to average it out over all of the time, you know, that this is what it costs for them to provide the services that they provide to Somerville. And the services that they provide to Somerville are technical support. Primarily, we can contact them anytime we have questions about eligibility or about process, about you know, bonding, all of the difficult things. We can contact the coalition to ask for their support. And also, they do a lot of advocacy at the state level where tweaks have been needed in the CPA legislation or to increase the funding levels significantly for the states, for the state match. So in fact, they have an appeal right now. I don't know if all of you received the newsletters from the coalition. Let me know if you don't. They recently sent an appeal to contact your legislators to ask them to support an increase in state funding for the state match for this year. So that will help us to be able to cover all of the projects that we have in the pipeline, receiving a higher level of state funds. So That's the kind of work that they do.
Okay.
Well, and I guess this year's been particularly complicated with the taxes like sort of tipping over into a certain realm where it had to go to a vote or return to the taxpayers. And so there's been a lot of sort of jockeying around for the use of these funds, which we would have normally just sort of gotten, but because it was a higher amount this year, it's become a little bit of a free-for-all.
Yeah.
Well, do I have a motion to approve the membership fees for Somerville?
Sure, I'll make that motion.
Can I have a second?
I'm happy to second.
Okay. So I vote yes. Rebecca? Are you with us?
She's here.
Yes,
Maybe we'll
I'm here.
Just chewing your dinner?
I vote yes.
Okay. So with that, the motion passes.
Great, thank you. And with that, that's everything that I have for the agenda this evening.
All right.
All right. Well, great. Thank you everyone for coming to this meeting, to this rescheduled meeting. And I will see you all again in 2 weeks for our usual September meeting.
Right.
And with that, the meeting's closed.
I think we need a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
All right. And a second?
I'll second it.
And I vote yes. Rebecca?
Yes.
All right.
All right.
Rebecca, don't hold us up.
All right. So
Good
with
night,
that, see you all in
Have a
2
good
weeks.
night. Thank
All
you.
right. Yes. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.